Evolution, Chapter 31, On the Inside. Jen had never done drugs, and with her experience with the blue dust Morg was having the prisoners mine from below in Karsakon, she wasn't inclined to start any time soon. Her head still hurt, even now on the skiff back to Earth. Several plumber teams were retaking in Karsakon. Jen had sent her recording of Morg's orders to kill them as evidence to the magistrates, and left it at that, handing Morg over to the authorities as soon as was humanly possible. She was currently laying on a set of empty crates with her jacket over her head to block out the light. She winced as the jacket was pulled aside. "We need to talk." Gwen glared down at her cousin. Jen raised an eyebrow. "I think we've about covered everything," she said petulantly, snatching her jacket back. Gwen shook her head. "No, we haven't. Not until you get putting Kevin down out of your head. He deserves a second chance." Jen shook her head. "Gwen, he's had a second chance, and a third. I'm not inclined to give him another." She stood, making to leave the hold and try and find a med kit that hopefully had some painkillers she could use to calm her pounding head. "What are you talking about? He was on his second chance when he sacrificed his sanity to save the universe." Jen flinched, partially from her cousin's guilt-tripping and partially from the raised volume of her voice. "No, he was on his third. His first was when we met. His second was when the two of us got kidnapped by Slick's Vigma and used as gladiators. He would have killed me if I hadn't made friends with someone bigger than him." Gwen stared at her cousin, rummaging in one of the medkits. "When did this happen?" Jen sighed as her search came up empty. She grabbed one of the cool packs and activated it instead, pressing it to her pounding head. "Remember that fight between me and Kevin at the wind farm? When the two of you disappeared and you showed back up in an escape pod? Yeah. You never said what happened." "Yeah, well, I didn't like being cuffed to Kevin Levin and made to help him fight when the Omnitrix timed out. If we hadn't started a prisoner revolt, we'd have been taken out of the galaxy. We worked together for about 20 minutes. I thought we could get back to Earth together. Maybe put this whole thing behind us. Then he stabbed me in the back because he could. That was his second chance, so yeah, he was on his third. I'm not ready to get stabbed again." Gwen made to speak. "This isn't up for debate, Gwen," Jen said, glaring at her cousin under the ice pack. "He'd have killed the warden without a second thought. Almost did. The only reason he left was because he thought he had. What happens when he comes after us? When he goes after Grandpa Max for not being able to save his dad? What happens then? Are you going to talk him down? 'Cause that really worked today. Kevin's gone, Gwen. I don't think we're getting him back." Gwen was silent for a moment. She took a deep breath. "Let me try. The machine Cooper's making, when we pair it with the Dominus Librium, we can save him, Jen. I have to believe that. Please let me try." Jen looked up at the tears shining in her cousin's eyes. "You get a chance, but that's all I can offer. He goes after you or Grandpa Max. That chance goes out the window." Gwen nodded slightly, then frowned. "What about you?" Jen shrugged as she leaned back, draping her jacket back over her head, laying it on the ice pack. "Him coming after me is inevitable. But if you're right, and he's still in there, he might not come after Grandpa Max. And he shouldn't come after you. Whatever Kevin is, he's in love with you." She didn't see the tears spring from her cousin's eyes as she walked away. She really wasn't sure, though. Kevin had definitely not been himself at Karsakon. He'd been bent only on revenge. He'd been without a real driving intelligence, just anger. He'd spoken, but it was more of a growl, and he'd disregarded Gwen almost entirely. Jen sighed as she closed her eyes. A bright light made her open them not too long after. For a moment, she thought someone had pulled off her jacket again, but it was still over her head. She frowned and fought with the pockets for a moment before pulling out the emerald-coated mirror, which was glowing brightly. She flipped it open and to Charmcaster's smiling face. The smile fell from her face in a moment when she saw Jen, though. You look like hell. Jen nodded. Probably. Alien drugs will do that to you. Charmcaster grimaced. You were drugged? Jen shrugged. Sort of. It's not important. Charmcaster's frown grew. It sounds pretty important. Are you okay? Jen nodded. I'm fine. Just a killer hangover, and I'm not on Earth, so I can't even take anything for it. She sighed, and Charmcaster tilted her head at her. Any of your aliens have mana control? Jen nodded. Not sure what the leftovers of this drug in my system might do to them, though, so I don't want to risk transforming until it's out of my system. Charmcaster nodded. Sounds smart. I may have a lead on the Dominus Librium. Nothing concrete yet, but it's definitely still in the continental U.S. Jen shrugged. That's good to know. Aside from the drugging, are you okay? Jen sighed, looking up at the ceiling and reactivating the cold pack. It was a lovely piece of tech that, like a heating pack, could be reactivated more than once, and lasted only 2 hours at a time. They must be nearing Earth by now. Sure. Charmcaster raised an eyebrow. Okay, I don't know you that well, and even I know you're lying. Jen glared at the mirror in her hand, then she shook her head. Tell me something good, please. I need it in my life right now. Charmcaster nodded. Well, the people of Ledger Domain got together and agreed to a council of elders to do most of the ruling, but named me queen to preside over them. Jen raised an eyebrow and laughed slightly. Don't expect me to call you your majesty. I've been calling you Charmcaster for too long. The silver-haired enchantress laughed. Of course not. I'd never expect my friends to call me anything else. Jen smiled lightly, but it slipped into a frown quite quickly. Are we friends? Charmcaster looked contemplative. I'd like us to be. You helped me take back my home. In more than one way, you gave me a chance. It means a lot to me. Jen nodded. Say you had a friend who was known to stab people in the back. They've done a lot of good, even saved your life a few times, but they do something that you know you can't forgive. Or almost do it, but you know they won't stop. What would you do? She asked it so quietly she wasn't sure for a moment if Charmcaster had heard her. Then she looked down at the mirror in her hand and saw Charmcaster was watching her with fascination. Caught in the act, the sorceress frowned. You've given them a chance before? Did they use it well? Once, yes. You can't discount that. My advice? Wear armor. When Jen frowned at her, she shrugged. Be ready for the knife. Know that you've been stabbed once. They're likely to do it again. But if they've used their chances wisely, they might deserve another. I don't know Kevin well enough to say yes or no either way. I never said it was Kevin. Charmcaster laughed. You know, when you lie, your left eye twitches. Jen blushed slightly. It's cute. Besides, he and your cousin are closest to you, and I can't see Gwen ever stabbing you in the back, even when you didn't get along. You two care so deeply. And I think you've been burned for it more than she has. Jen looked away from the mirror. That's nothing to be ashamed of, Charmcaster added quickly. I wish I could feel like you do. I don't know how you do it and stay sane. With everything you do. I've been a hero in Ledger Domain for less than a month, and I'm about ready to tear my hair out. Jen laughed and looked back down at the mirror. I'd say it gets better, but it really doesn't. Charmcaster nodded. I had a feeling you'd say that. But when this is over, no matter how it ends, come to Ledger Domain. You'll need a vacation. Jen smiled slightly at the enchantress. How do you figure? Charmcaster shrugged. You won't want to be around your cousin and her boyfriend when they're making up. Call it a hunch. If things went the other way, she'd need a place to pull her pieces back together, but Charmcaster had the tact not to bring up that alternative. Jen sighed. A vacation sounds really good. I might take you up on that. Charmcaster smiled, pink eyes twinkling. I hope you do. And, just to clarify, I do like you, and might even take you out on a date when you vacation here, if you're up for it. Jen laughed again, resting her head back against the ice pack. Honestly, something as simple as a real date sounds nice. Once all this is done. She twiddled the ring on the silver chain around her neck. It was warm from resting near her skin, but it felt almost like permission. Julie was right, that Ethan wouldn't want her to sit around and mourn for the rest of her life. But we'll go slow, she said to Charmcaster, who nodded. I can live with slow. I'll call again when I've got a clearer lead on the Dominus Librium. You can call any time. Jen nodded. Thank you, Charmcaster. My pleasure, hero. The mirror fogged over, eclipsing the image as Jen felt the skiff land. She sighed, not looking forward to the talking to she was going to get from Magister Patellidae. But he wasn't the one waiting for them when they deboarded the skiff. Grandpa Max stood in the hangar, and both girls ran into his arms, not caring that he had to tell them off for literally losing every alien in a prison in the null void. Jen let him lead Gwen away as she cried over Kevin's loss again. She said nothing, slipping over to Cooper. How are we doing? Pretty good. It's done. If you can get your hands on the Dominus Librium thing, it should work. Jen nodded. Thank you, Cooper. He nodded to her. No problem. Is Gwen gonna be okay? Jen shrugged. I have no idea. Kevin almost killed someone today. Would have if we hadn't been there. We don't kill. She's not taking what we might have to do well. You haven't told her about it, have you? Cooper shook his head. He'd kept his word and kept his mouth shut about the kill switch. I still don't like it. Jen nodded. Me either. Where's Pierce? On a transport to the academy. Jen raised both eyebrows. Pierce was a fully fledged rookie plumber. He didn't need the academy, despite having never been. Cooper seemed to notice her confusion. He volunteered to take some new recruits and supplies so he could spend some time with the Max Force. I stayed to finish our project. Jen nodded and patted him on the shoulder. Thanks, Cooper. He nodded as Jen set off after her grandfather.